Welcome back to my channel for another Leica episode, and this episode now is all about the Leica SL3, which is this beauty here in front of me on the table. For the demonstrations I'm going to show in this video, I've mounted the Aposumicron 50mm widest open aperture is an f2.0, and what I want to show in this video is my personal setup of this camera with all the individual configurations you can take in terms of button customization, control wheel customization, important settings in the menu and all of that. And the background of this video is that in a recent discussion with my friends at the Leica store in Zurich, they told me that the most frequently asked question at the Leica Academy is, how do I best possible set up my camera? So I will provide this tutorial here. I will hopefully provide you some useful insights for your own individual workflow in taking photos with the Leica SL3. And I will also post a second video about the Leica SL3, which is then dedicated to autofocus only. All the settings you have here, all the options when it comes to subject tracking, eye recognition on human faces, animal detection and all of that. And the autofocus system of the Leica SL3 is the most complex autofocus system Leica has ever developed. It's the same system as what you find in the Leica Q3 28 and in the Leica Q3 43. And I think it's worthwhile to spend more time with autofocus than with some other topics. So I will carve out this topic and post it in a separate video. And now let's get right into the topic. Before I reset that camera to factory settings, allow me some housekeeping. Imagine yourself being in New York City. It's a beautiful warm morning, it's 8 AM. You're entering a coffee shop, the person on the coffee machine gives you a very bright smile, and the world for a short moment just seems to be perfect. And then in front of the desk where you later pay for your coffee, there is a little mug saying this is the tip for everyone working here. What will you do? I very likely will pull out a $1 bill or maybe $2 and put it in that mug just to say thank you for a very warm welcome and for the coffee I'm going to have in a moment. And for me and my channel, it's exactly the same. Your tip for me is if you would agree to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell, share my videos, help to increase the reach of my channel, and in this way let me feel some appreciation for the work I'm investing here. So if you want to do that, you're invited to do so and I will be very grateful. And now let's go into resetting the camera and starting to set it up from scratch. Since I want to set up the camera from scratch, I'm now going to reset the camera. So I go into menu and then camera settings is on the very last page. By the way, you see here the page indications. So this is page number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The favorites page, which was there on the Leica SL2, is no longer here, but you can customize the control screen, which I'm going to show in a moment. So let's go to the very last page. Let's go here. Then we have camera settings. Let's go into that, and then reset camera is on the very bottom. So instead of going down here all the way, I just go up and end up at reset camera. And then it asks me, do you want to reset the camera setting? I say yes. I want to reset user profiles. If you have them, maybe you want to preserve them if once in a while you need to reset your camera, so make your decision wisely. But here I say yes, I want to reset it. Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, reset. Reset image numbering. No, I don't want to do that because for the time being, if I never reset it, the image numbering is identical to the shutter count, so I want to keep it. So here I say no. Then we reset custom LUTs, yes, and we can restart the camera. All right, let's do it. Let's switch it off. We wait for a moment. If I now switch it on, I will see that beautiful animation, which always comes if you take a Leica SL3 fresh out of box and then start to initially set it up. Ready to go? I go for English, but you choose whatever language is best for you. I skip typically at the beginning the Leica Fotos app and basically connecting it to the app. So we click this off. They ask me again here. Let's try to do this again. So here then I say, yes, I want to skip that for the time being. Time zone for me, Berlin is fine. Daylight saving time is not currently applicable. Then we have today the 13th of November. So let's go into that. First of all, here you have the option to reshuffle day, month, year. For me, that's the European setup, so I keep that. Let's go here and then let's go to 13. So we go here 13 and then we have November and 2024. That's it. So let's go back. Then we have the time setting. It's currently around 20 p.m., so 8 p.m. And I prefer the 24-hour system here, but in the US maybe you want to have 12 hours and indicate AM and PM. For me, actually, the 24 hours is fine. And then we go here to 8 p.m., which in the 24-hour system is 20, and we are good to go. Next, I want to show you how to customize the control screen. And the control screen has a major uplift compared to the Leica SL2. And you also have these beautiful icons here, which some people at the influencer event started to call Leicans. And what you cannot customize is your setting for aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and exposure value. These are fixed and predetermined, prescribed by Leica. You cannot change them, not customize them. But you have 2 rows here with in each row 4 fields which you can customize. And customizing these fields happens by tap and hold, then it goes into a menu, and then you have a bunch of options here. And I'm going to apply now some logic how to customize these fields so that they perfectly fit into my workflow. Of course, you are free to do this in any way you want to do, but for me, what I'm going to show you is for me the best possible setup to suit my workflow. So let's see, what is the logical sequence of steps in a way what I determine as parameters on the camera when I go to a photo shooting. First of all, I want to determine the exposure mode. So am I in aperture priority, shutter speed priority, fully manual mode? I never use program mode, which is currently indicated here by NP. And I have this choice here. So here's program mode, manual, aperture priority, shutter priority. I never use program mode here. And so that's the first thing I always have to determine. The next decision in the logical sequence of steps is what is the drive mode I want to have. And drive mode sits currently here. And there is single, there is continuous shooting with different burst rates. And then at the very end, we have interval shooting and exposure bracketing. And that's the second thing I decide when I go for a shooting. After the exposure mode, I want to determine my drive mode. The third step in my workflow is the file format, and that's currently sitting here. And you see everything I need to decide is basically spread over these 8 fields and not in a good order. So we are going to change that. But the file format is important. In a video about a year back, I showed in a bit of a technical approach that for the Leica SL3 and also for the Q3 cameras, MDNG and MJPEG is the best if you want to go for the highest dynamic range. But many of you will want to leverage the large 60 megapixel resolution. So let's keep the setting in this way, but let's place it from here to here. And I'm going to show you in a moment how that works. And then on the 4th field in the first row, the decision will take place whether I'm going to remotely shoot via the Leica Fotos app, iPhone, iPad, what have you, or do I shoot with my camera standalone. And then the first row is already determined. In the second row, I then want to place things like focus mode, autofocus mode, metering, and all of that. And I'm going to show you now how to get this done and how to customize these 8 fields in line with the logic and the rationale I just provided for my own individual workflow. All right, let's get this done. So first of all here, the exposure mode is already where I want to have it, namely in place number 1 in row 1. And I typically go to aperture priority here. On the second here, I want to have the drive mode. The drive mode is sitting here. Now let's tap and hold on this field and let's see what I get offered here in the menu. Unfortunately, there are 3 pages here. There is no drive mode, and that's something you need to be aware of. And I'm curious, and please drop me a comment if you have been aware of what I'm going to say right now. Why this is not available here on the second field in the first row is because it's sitting in the second field on the second row. And here's the drive mode. And the camera, of course, is programmed in a way that if you have already one functionality here sitting on a field, you will not place it in a second location, because that would be a waste of, let's say, quick access fields. And that's why if I tap and hold here, I will not get the option to go into the drive mode here and to choose this here. It's just not available. So what I need to do is I need to remove it from here. So I will here basically set a placeholder. Let's choose something else here as a placeholder. Let's go into that. Let's say IDR comes in nice and handy. And now you will see if I tap and hold now on the second field in the first row, actually all of a sudden drive mode is available. Have a look, tap and hold. And here's the drive mode. Now I can place it where I want it to be. Now we have exposure mode, drive mode. On the third position, I wanted to have the file format, but the file format is already sitting here. So I have to get this away from here. Let's tap and hold. Let's choose something else, like for instance, sensor format. I don't care. And now I have here available the file format. See, here it is. magically it appears if it gets taken away from another field. And now we have already 3 of these fields customized in the way I described my workflow customization before. And here I want to have the Leica Fotos app. Same thing as before, Photos app is already here, you see? So I need to get this away from here in order to install it on the 4th field in the first row. So let's tap and hold. Let's say we take here autofocus mode. Let's tap and hold here. And then we get Leica Fotos. See? Simple like a charm. And now the first row is already fully customized in the way I want to have it. Now here I want to have the focus mode. So let's go into that. Let's see if focus mode is available. And here it is. That's the focus mode. And the focus mode basically is autofocus single, continuous manual focus, and intelligent autofocus, which I never use because then the camera decides on what to focus, which is not what I want. The second field in the second row, I want to have the autofocus mode. So let's click on that. And again, you will see the autofocus mode is not available, is not here. And the reason is that it is sitting here already. You see, here's the autofocus mode with field zone, tracking, eye, face, body detection, and so on. So I need to get it away from here in order to place it somewhere else. See, sometimes this is not reacting the way I want it to react. Let's try to tap and hold again. Here we go. Let's take, for instance, again, the sensor format is a good placeholder. Let's tap and hold here. And then we get the autofocus mode. So now we have the decision whether we want to track or have field, whatever it is, we have it here in the second field in the second row. And then here I want to have my metering, and metering is not currently somewhere else in the field, so I have it available here. And now we have one spare one because white balance is something I typically always have on auto. There are very rare occasions where I pre-configure my white balance because I do this typically in post if I don't like what the auto white balance was figuring out before. So we have one more placeholder here. Now the choice of course is all yours what you want to have on the last field here in the second row. But for me, I'm very often a tripod shooter. So I shoot very often at night. I have my camera on a tripod, do long exposures. So what I want to have here for easy and quick access is the self timer. So let's tap and hold. And then we get it down here, self timer. And now this is configured. And remember what I said in terms of logic. Exposure mode is the first one I want to determine. Then the drive mode, then the file format. Then whether I do have a remote shooting or shooting with the camera standalone. Then my focus mode, my autofocus mode, my metering and the self timer. And for me, that's the ideal configuration I want to have on that control screen. And for you, of course, the choices are all yours. Just remember, if something is already sitting somewhere and you want to place it in a different field, you have to remove it first, as I showed, for instance, on drive mode, which was sitting here. So I had to remove it here and then move it up and basically configure it for the second field in the first row. That's the only thing you have to bear in mind. Otherwise, the choice is, of course, completely yours. For me, that works best. Next, let's go into some basic settings. So if you go to the first page of the menu, focus mode I have under control now via the control screen in the same way as autofocus mode. There are focus settings here. Let's look into that. Autofocus setup, we have profiles. I think this is a more advanced feature, which I'm not going to cover here at this point in time. Focus aid is important. So first of all, make sure you have the autofocus assist lamp on, because if the scene in front of the camera is dark, this will help you with a little LED light. And the auto magnification is also on. And auto magnification basically means if I have an SL lens mounted, which is an autofocus lens, but I start to manually focus, it will, the moment in time I turn the focus ring, automatically magnify the scene. And that is very helpful for precise manual focusing. So keep that on at all times. Exposure metering I can control from the control screen. ISO settings, something I want to put now on a button. And we have various customizable buttons here. We have actually 2 on the front side and we have 2 at the top of the camera. We have 1 here and we have 1 here. ISO for me always sits on the right hand side button of the 2 customizable buttons at the top of the camera. So if I press on that here, it currently is programmed for white balance. That's not what I want. I really want to have the ISO here, and as I said before, my camera is always on auto white balance, and then in post-processing I do the trick. So what I can do now here is on that button here, press and hold, and then I get a bunch of options. So this is what I can all choose. There is a lot to choose from, and it's actually quite confusing. And many of these menu entries I would never put on a customizable function button. So let's make this list, when I press and hold, shorter. And you see how many pages there are. This is a lot here. And this is very tedious, in particular if you want to change a setting on a customizable button very quickly. And this list here, if I press and hold, needs to become much shorter. Where can I do this in the menu? Well, under Customize Control. So let's go into the menu and let's go here to page number 4. And then on page number 4, you actually have here Customize Control. And under Customize Control, the first menu entry here is Function Buttons, which means the customizable buttons. So let's go here into that, and then you see currently everything in this long list of functions, what comes up when I press and hold one of these customizable buttons is actually activated. And I want to cross out everything now I would never put on a customizable function button. So let's go to the very top here, and photo video is something I never will use on a function button. I never want to waste a function button for that. Why is this the case? Because I can just swipe here and will be in video mode. So there is already a quick access which brings me into video mode and back into photo mode. So I really don't need to waste a customizable button for that. Let's go back into Customize Controls. So I will deactivate this. And let me just show you, if it is activated, I press and hold here and go to the very top here. Then you will see photo video switching between the two modes. Photo mode, video mode is here. If I go back into the menu now, into this control here and deactivate it, this is no longer the top position of the list. Have a look. The first position, if I go up to the top of the list now, is actually toggle info level. See that? So the toggling between photo and video mode is gone because I have deactivated it in Customize Controls. In the FN button menu, it's deactivated. Toggle info levels, I don't need on a custom button. Magnification, maybe, so we keep that. Drive mode is something I have now in the quick access menu in the control screen. I don't need that here, so we can deactivate it. Interval shooting is also under drive mode. No need to have this on a button. Exposure bracketing, I don't need here. Self timer is under the control screen now. Focus mode is under the control screen. Autofocus mode is under the control screen, and so on and so on. Let me quickly accelerate this and deactivate everything I don't want to have potentially on a customizable function button. Alright, that's it. And if I now press and hold that button I want to customize for ISO, let's do it. Then you see this list is now much shorter, and I've only left activated things I potentially might see on one of these function buttons. See, this is 1 page, 2 page, the next page. It's about 3 pages and 1 line item. It's much more overseeable and very helpful if you do it in that way. Of course, you leave activated in that long list what you might want to have potentially on a customizable button, right? That's my choice, and that's how I like to set this up. Now what I said I want to have here is ISO, so let's go here to ISO, and if I now tab it, it takes me into the ISO menu. I have here auto, 50, 64, and then it goes all the way to the highest ISO value I can choose on the Leica SL3, which is 100,000. And that gives me quick and easy access to the ISO settings, including the auto setting, which comes in nice and handy. So this button here is fully customized now to my liking. Okay, since we are at customization of buttons now anyway, there is a second function button sitting here on the left hand side of the one where we place the ISO functionality on. And this one I want to have to be perspective control. So let's press and hold. Let's go down here. And I activated perspective control before in customize control. So here we go. If I press now this one here, I have perspective control on. If I press it again, perspective control is off. And perspective control is something I've described various times on my channel. It's very useful for me because I do a lot of cityscapes and architectural photography. And then I get these auxiliary lines and the metadata in the file, which then later will be uploaded to Lightroom, contains that information, and I can do perspective controls in Lightroom very quickly and very easily. So that's a functionality I want to have here. Very important for me. You are again free to have your choice on that button, but that's something I use very often in the same way as on the control screen here. I said I want to have the self timer here for tripod shooting. The next function button I want to customize is this one here. So it actually says FN button for function button. And what I want to have here is that when I move my focus field, and let's say I focus here, I want to have one button where this jumps quickly and immediately back to the center of the frame. And naturally you would have this here on the joystick. If you push the joystick, press it into the camera body, it should jump back. That's the way it works on many other camera brands like Nikon, Sony, and so on. But that is not a function I can assign to the joystick in the Leica universe. I show this in a moment. So I will customize this button here to take me back into the center of the frame with my focus field. This button currently is programmed for magnification. Let me show you. Let's focus here. If I press it, it actually goes and magnifies the scene in front of the camera. And that is something which I don't want to have on this button. I will show you later that I'm going to place this on this button here, which is currently toggling between LCD screen and electronic viewfinder. I always have toggling between these two on automatic. So if I move my eye to an electronic viewfinder, it switches the live view to the EVF. And if I remove my eye from the EVF, it switches back into LCD. So I don't need a button for that to toggle between these viewing modes. And I can use this button here for magnification. The way to get toggling the autofocus field back to the center of the frame is I press and hold here. And then I get here toggle focus point. Let's select this one. Let's move the focus field somewhere else. And then press that button and boom, it jumps back to the center of the frame. You see that? Very convenient to have that function. As I said, I would have preferred to assign it to a press of the joystick, but that's not possible. I'll show you that in a moment. But if I press that button now, it jumps back to the center, and that's exactly the way I want to have it. By the way, you can always customize the size of a focus field. You just tap and hold, and then you can here with the rear control wheel make this smaller, going back to the size I had before, or make it bigger. I very often have it on the smallest size for precise focusing. Let's now get the magnification on this button here. So I press and hold. And here's the magnification, right the first entry. Let's push it. And now if I press that button, boom, it magnifies. If I press it again, it goes back into standard live view. Very simple, and is something I want to have on a button because that's something I very often need when focusing, independent actually whether I go for manual focus or whether I go for autofocus. Now I just mentioned that I cannot get the focus field back to the center of the frame by pressing the joystick here. And I want to show this in the menu. Let's go to customize control in the way we did before, and there is a dedicated section for the joystick. And then there are distinction between autofocus mode and manual focus mode. In autofocus mode, you only can assign autofocus lock, auto exposure lock, or both to a press of the joystick, and no function to actually toggle the autofocus field back to the center of the frame. That's why I had to put it on this button here. But what's very convenient is to actually have on this one here the autofocus lock and the auto exposure lock, because that is something which comes close to back button focus. There is no real back button focus, although I posted some videos which is kind of a proxy for back button focus on the Leica SL2 in the past, but it is not exactly the same as the functionality you would get on a Nikon C8 or C9 for instance. But at least you can do something here. So let me show you this. So this is what I want here. And now if I get my pointing finger off the shutter release button, I can just focus here. You see, it turns green as long as I press it. Let's go here to the face of Jennifer. It focuses and it also handles the exposure. If you want to separate focusing from metering, you can also go for something different here, of course. You can easily go for, let's say, autofocus lock only, and then the metering is separated in a way I demonstrated in various tutorials in the past. But if you want to have an easy life, then go for this, because it meters exposure at the point where the focus field is sitting, and it also takes focus, and then you're good to go for your shot. Let's do this again. Here we go. What you can't do here is that after you have found focus, that it also releases the shot. There are other ways to do this, but not via the joystick. The play button and the menu button cannot be customized. I can press and hold as long as I want the menu button. It will always take me immediately into the control screen and give me access to my customized 8 fields here for functions I want to access in an easy and quick way. And for the play button is the same. You can press and hold it, but you will not get a menu list of things where you can choose and assign a different function to the play button. That's just the way it is. My camera here is currently mounted on a tripod, but if I show you this picture here, you see that on the front side of the camera there are 2 more function buttons. And for the lower one of the 2, I want to now assign another function. So I press and hold it here. Let me go there. And what I want to have here actually is touch autofocus. I don't use touch autofocus that often, but it's convenient to have quick access to it. And then the upper button here, I want to also customize. Let's press and hold. And here I want to have, let me go down here. I want to have here the Leica Looks. Where is it here? Leica Looks film style. And I'm typically a raw file format shooter, so I go for DNG. But the Leica Looks are so brilliant in my opinion. It sometimes is just a lot of fun playing with these looks. So I want to have a quick access, and since I don't have placed any access to Leica Looks here in my control screen, I put it to the upper button on the front side of the camera, and then whenever I'm here in live view, I can press that button. It's actually easy to find. And now I have here the different film styles, and then here, if I installed it, which I'm going to do in a moment, in order to set the camera up, I will also get a choice for my Leica Looks. I show this later in the video. Let's now talk about control wheels. So there are 3 control wheels here. There is this one here, and I call this the rear control wheel, but Leica calls it the thumb wheel. So if you ever look it up in an English manual of the Leica SL3, you need to look for thumb wheel. And then we have 2 on the top, one on the right hand side here, and one on the left hand side here, and all 3 are to some extent customizable. There is also a push function for that thumb wheel here. If I push it inside, I can take control over my exposure mode, and that is something which I already have here. So I would love to have some other function here, but unfortunately that push, that press of the thumb wheel is not customizable. Let's try this. I press it in and hold it, but it doesn't give me a menu where I can choose a different function, unfortunately. So this will always be here, the exposure mode. And well, then we have double occupied this, we have it here, but here I want to have it because of the logic of my workflow. And here you have another quick access. If you press it inside, you can change, for instance, from aperture priority to shutter speed priority. That's the way it is. Now, what you can customize is a bunch of other things on these control wheels. Let's go into customize controls. And let's have a look here. And then we go to the dials, and it distinguishes between autofocus lenses and manual focus lenses. For instance, if you would have a Leica M lens mounted on the Leica M to L adapter, then you would be in this section. And here is kind of the same structure as what you see on the autofocus lenses. So I will not repeat myself and just focus on the AF lenses here. If I go into that, I can, depending on the exposure mode, so this is basically the first determination I make here, depending on the exposure mode, I can say what the function is I have assigned, for instance, to the thumb wheel. So currently when I'm in aperture priority, the thumb wheel here is used for controlling the aperture. Let's have a look how this looks like. If I'm in here, and you see I'm currently here widest open at f2.0, watch what happens if I turn the wheel. I start to stop down, let's say all the way to f8.0. And then turning it in the other direction, I get back to widest open f2.0. That's the way it is. Now, is it intuitive that if you rotate it in this way that you stop down? Maybe it should be the other direction, and that's something you can change in the menu. Let me show you, and it's of course a matter of your preferred taste. So if I go into customize controls here, go back into dials, go here into dial direction, I can say the thumb wheel is currently in this direction here. I stop down, but maybe in this direction I want to not stop down, but open the aperture and stop down in the other direction. So let's change it, and maybe in order to see this better, let's stop down here to an f8.0 so you see it. And currently the direction is, if you go back to the menu here, let's go into that dial direction. Here, currently it's clockwise for opening the aperture wider. And that's the way it should be. So if I turn in this direction, I can make the aperture wider and get all the way to widest open f2.0. If I go in the other direction, counterclockwise, I stop down. That's the logic of that symbol. Now, if I change that, let me go there again, a lot of menu entries here, dial direction, and I change it, then it should go the other direction. So if I'm now here at f.0 and I go clockwise, it will not open the aperture, but further stop down. You see this? Now I stop down to f16, and in the other direction, I open the aperture wider. I find the way it is factory set up, and I will switch it back right now. Intuitive, and more intuitive than the other way, but as I said, is a matter of taste what you prefer. Let's go into dial direction. Let's switch this back. So now if I go here counterclockwise, I stop down. If I go clockwise, I open the aperture wider. that's the way it is. But you see, there is a lot of customization here where you can again follow your own intuition, which direction of the dial is better for you if you want to stop down or open the aperture wider. What happens if my exposure mode is shutter speed priority? Let's go into customize controls, let's go into dials, and let's go into autofocus lenses. What happens if we go into shutter priority mode? Then of course the thumb wheel is exposure value. I have choices here. I can also say shutter speed, and for me that's much more intuitive. That's why I change it to that. So now if I'm here, f2.0, if I now switch into shutter speed priority here, boom, done, and I use that thumb wheel, then you see how it makes my shutter speed faster if I turn it counterclockwise. You see, counterclockwise gets faster and faster, turning it clockwise gets slower and slower. And again here, you can change the direction of travel. Let's go into customize controls. Let's go into dials. Let's go into dial direction, thumb wheel. If I switch this in the other direction as I did before for the aperture, it's the other direction. So now it becomes in clockwise direction faster and counterclockwise direction slower in terms of shutter speed. You see this here, right? Watch this number, how it is changing in the way I just described. But again, the factory setting is more intuitive for me, so I keep it the way it was factory set up. Let's go back here. Let's go here to, dial direction. Let's put it back to where it was. And in the same way, you can also customize now the top right-hand side wheel and the top left-hand side wheel, and you can assign different functions to it. Let's quickly complete where we dropped off. So let's go back here to aperture priority. Then we want the thumb wheel to control the aperture, of course. If we are in shutter speed priority, we want to control with the thumb wheel the shutter speed. And if we are in fully manual mode, let's go there now. Then I want to control with the thumb wheel my aperture and the right dial my shutter speed. Let's quickly test this out. I have two options now to get and change my exposure mode from currently aperture priority to fully manual mode. I can go via my touch element here in the logical sequence of steps I described pretty early in the video. So I can go here to manual mode if I want to do that. I can also go via the push of the thumb wheel here and press it into the camera body. Boom, and then I go to manual mode. And now I should be able to control my aperture with the thumb wheel and my exposure time with the right hand side top control wheel. So let's do this. Here I stop down, you see it. My auto ISO adapts accordingly to keep the exposure constant, and here I can control my shutter speed. You see this here. Look, this is slower, this is faster, very easy. And that's the way I set it up under customize controls in the dials here. If you see here, we have fully manual mode, thumb wheel is f-stop, and right dial is shutter speed. And left dial is ISO. We have not talked yet about the left dial. I'll come to that in a second. What we have also not discussed yet, if I'm in fully manual mode, which I'm in now, because we just switched into that, I have here the aperture, here the shutter speed. But if I'm going back to aperture priority, this control wheel here is no longer needed for my shutter speed because the camera figures out the shutter speed. But what is with this wheel? If I now turn it, looks to me like exposure compensation. If you look here, you see, and this is exposure compensation. And you can also see this in the menu now, because if I go back into customize controls, we go to dials, we go to autofocus lenses, and then you see here the right dial, if I'm in aperture priority mode, is actually exposure value, so exposure compensation. Now, what options do I have here? I can also say this is aperture, which is what I will use because I don't want to remember which of the wheels is for what. So if I'm in aperture priority, no matter what I rotate on the right hand side, on the top or on the thumb wheel, it should actually change my aperture. So let's try to do this. Let's choose this. Let's go out here. And if I now want to change my aperture, I can use the thumb wheel in the usual way, but I can also use the top dial here on the right hand side. You see this? And this is very convenient because it's avoiding mistakes and erroneous operation for me. And I will do the same in shutter speed priority now. So let's have a look how to set this up. Let's go into customize controls, dials, autofocus lenses. Let's go here into shutter speed priority. And here it's already there. The thumb wheel and the right hand side dial on top of the camera body steers the shutter speed. Let's have a look. So we have to switch from aperture priority to shutter speed priority. And then here you see It changes my shutter speed, slower, 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 higher, 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 and the same I can do with the top control wheel. So I don't have to think for a moment when I'm changing my settings whether I need to use this wheel or this wheel, whatever is on the right hand side, controls the parameter I predetermine as a photographer, namely in aperture priority the aperture and in shutter speed priority the shutter speed. Simple like that. Let's quickly summarize what we have achieved here. So in aperture priority, both wheels on the right hand side steer the aperture in the way I just described. If I'm in shutter speed priority, both wheels on the right hand side steer the shutter speed. No need to think what wheel I want to use, whatever is convenient and in my immediate reach I use to change the shutter speed. If I'm in fully manual mode, I have here the aperture and here the shutter speed, which is also what I want to have and is recommended by my site. So this looks now good. And the program mode, as I said, I never use, but for the sake of completeness, let's quickly look into it. And here the program shift in the way you use in program mode. But for me, that's a mode which is excluded. I never use it, so I don't want to go deeper into it. And I actually recommend to you too, if you want to do serious photography, the program mode is a taboo. Don't even touch it. Go for aperture priority and shutter speed priority. That's the semi-automatic shooting modes. And then go for manual mode if you want to control both the aperture and the shutter speed. Alright, almost done with control wheels. There's one more which we need to discuss. That's this one here on the left hand side at the top of the camera body. And just to do some housekeeping here, in the same way as I told you before, whereas I call this very often the rear control wheel, Leica's nomenclature for this is the thumb wheel. And for this control wheel here, they call it the left dial, and this one here they call the right dial. That's, by the way it is set up in the menu here. And the left dial is currently set up for ISO. Now, I didn't want to have it that way. And I showed you earlier in the video that I set up ISO at this customizable button here at the top. I push it and then I can control my ISO value. Why do I want to have it on the right hand side? Because ISO for me is such an important parameter. I need to have it in reach of my right hand because I'm a right hand side shooter. And that's basically the reason why I wanted to have it here. But Leica originally, in the way this camera is factory set up and comes out of the box, has set it up here. And you see this here in the menu. Let's go back there again. Dials and then autofocus lenses. And here the left dial is set up for ISO. And the reason why this was not the case before on the Leica SL2, because this left dial was non-existing on the Leica SL2. There was no control wheel here on the left hand side at the top of the camera body on the SL2. That's a new mechanical element Leica introduced for the Leica SL3, and I just cannot get used to it, but it's an opportunity for you. If you are not used to having your ISO control here on the right hand side, and still my argument counts that this is convenient for a right hand side shooter, then you can set it up here in the way it comes out of box, factory installed by Leica. And let me show you how this works. So first of all, let's go into live view, and then be aware that I'm currently in aperture priority here. So I determine the aperture with the thumb wheel or with the top control wheel, and the way I set it up on both wheels it works. And the camera determines the shutter speed. And I'm here on auto ISO, and if I now turn the left dial, watch what happens. If I do it clockwise, nothing happens at all. But if I turn it counterclockwise, a little window will pop up, which gives me the opportunity to switch between auto ISO, which is indicated by the red capital letter A here, and fix ISO, which gives me manual control about the ISO value. So have a look. I turn it, and now I can switch here. Fix ISO, the red A is gone. Auto ISO, the red capital letter A is here, and so on. And if I'm now on fix ISO, let's go there. I switch to fix ISO. Then you see the red capital letter A for auto is gone. Now I can control via the left dial my ISO value. Of course, on the shutter speed, because I'm in aperture priority mode, the shutter speed is adapting accordingly. So have a look here. I turn up my ISO value, shutter speed gets faster, right? That's the way it should be. Here you see the ISO value, ISO 400, 1 over 160 seconds, ISO 500, 1 over 200 seconds, and vice versa. So I can now manually control my ISO via this dial. Now for me it's just not convenient because I have my right hand here and everything I do needs to happen between the top dial here on the right hand side, the thumb wheel, and these customizable buttons here which I reach for my thumb and my pointing finger. But for you, if you're not used to that workflow, maybe this is a great opportunity to leverage this new control wheel, this new left dial which was not there on the Leica SL2 and now is there on the Leica SL3. You see, I'm almost becoming passionate about it. Now let's do something different in order to complete this lecture here on ISO setup. So let's go to Auto ISO again. And if I now go into fully manual mode, which I'm going to switch here, then I don't even have to change between Auto ISO and Fix ISO as you saw it in my aperture priority mode. And you saw before when I turned this left dial clockwise, nothing happened. When I turned it counterclockwise, this little window appeared here where I could switch between Auto ISO and Fix ISO. Now here this is no longer the case. In both directions it works immediately. Have a look what happens here to the ISO value if I turn that wheel. Clockwise direction, counterclockwise, lower ISO, higher ISO, lower ISO. So this is actually quite smart in the way Leica solved this. If you don't mind, then maybe this is a good opportunity to have this wheel set up for ISO. And you can also not accidentally get here if you're a right-hand side shooter, right? You will just have to use the other hand to turn the ISO to a different value or to switch between Auto ISO and Fix ISO. I just wanted to mention that because that is something where I think my workflow is not optimal. It could be better if I would just force myself to get used having ISO here. But I have it here, right-hand side shooter, repeating myself. And I said before, I hardly use exposure compensation. It's just not my workflow and my way of shooting, although it's a classical way of doing photography, but I definitely do not want to have the ISO here. So let's program exposure compensation on this wheel here. There is no harm doing so because it's on the left hand side. I'm a right hand side shooter. I cannot reach with my fingers or my hand on this wheel and I will not accidentally touch it. And if I need exposure compensation once in a while, I have it at my disposal here on this control wheel. So let's get it set up for this. Let's go into customize control. Let's go into dials. Let's go into autofocus. Left dial is exposure compensation. Have a look here. I'm in aperture priority now. Let's quickly verify. Let's go back here. And now if I use this, you will see here the exposure compensation. Have a look. Now it gets darker. This was one full stop. This is one full stop brighter. And once in a while I use it, but not very often. And here on this control wheel, it doesn't do any harm to me, but it's there in any case I would need it. Let's do the same functionality for this button again for the sake of remembering for the other shooting modes, exposure modes here. So let's go into customize controls, dials, and here. And then if I'm going to shutter speed priority, I also want to have on the left dial now the exposure compensation. If I'm in fully manual mode, you know, there should actually also be here exposure compensation. Let's have a look. Let's go into fully manual mode. Here we go. And now if I turn this, it gives me exposure compensation, one full stop darker, one full stop brighter, and so on. And that's the way it works. So that's how you set up these control wheels. Now, of course, there is the same kind of procedure you need to go through for manual focus lenses here. But it's exactly the same. There are a few variations of the scheme. For instance, on the thumb wheel, it might be useful to have the magnification because in manual focus, you will always want to have focus peaking activated as well as magnification. But you can figure this out by yourself. It follows the same pattern, the same scheme as what I described under autofocus lenses. And you can, of course, customize this in the same way to suit your needs. There is one more setting I want to quickly show here. Let's say you go for fully manual shooting here. So you determine the aperture and the shutter speed. And let's say for the time being, this is 1/100 seconds and widest open f2.0. And now you don't want accidentally to change anything here. And currently you don't see it in terms of exposure because I'm on auto ISO, but otherwise it would change. We can quickly change that for a second to show it to you. Let's go to a meaningful ISO value. Let's say 400 here and let's focus. And now if I change the aperture and stop down, you see it gets darker. If I change the shutter speed to slower, it gets brighter. If I change the shutter speed to faster, it gets darker. So that's the effect we see. Now maybe I have found my ideal aperture and shutter speed and don't want accidentally to get any change to that if I accidentally would touch one of these control wheels. And then there's one setting here which you can use under the dials, and that's called dial lock. Let's activate it. And now if I turn these wheels, I can do whatever I want. You see there's a little lock symbol coming up here. and no of these wheels will do ever any change to my widest open f2.0 and 1/100 seconds, which might be convenient in certain situations, because it can happen that you accidentally change something on the wheels and then the image is ruined. So if you want to completely lock all these wheels here, then lock it and you will see the lock symbol the moment in time you want to rotate them. Let's go back and unlock them, dials. And now we can change it again. Again, I'm in fully manual mode. I can stop down, it gets darker. I can get my shutter speed adapted to faster, it gets darker. I can become slower, it gets brighter, and so on and so on. So I think that covers everything I wanted to say on these control elements. We know now how to customize buttons, how to assign functions to it. I gave you my recommendations, what the functions are I have assigned to my customizable function buttons. I explained to you the control wheels, the thumb wheel, the two top control wheels here, and how to change the direction of travel, how to actually get different functions assigned to them. Not everything in the way the flexibility is offered to us by Leica is ideal. As I said before, I would love to toggle the autofocus field back to the center of the frame by just a push on the joystick, but I could assign it to this FN button here, and if I'm here somewhere else, I can place the focus field back in the center of the frame. So all in, for me that works, and hopefully you will find that useful to create your own workflow the way you want to customize your camera, that it best possible serves you in your photographic creativity. Okay, let's now get back to the menu, and when we started to scroll through the menu. So we already were here, we said the ISO settings we want to have on a button. That's where we dropped off in the menu. EV increment, this is something important. Make sure you have it not on half stops but on third stops. That gives you more flexibility playing with your exposure, in particular in fully manual mode. Drive mode we have set up here for the touch functionality of one of these ALS fields. Self timer we have also quick access now. White balance, as I said, I leave this on auto white balance all the time, but you have all the options here. You also can go for a gray card and measure your white balance if you're one of these perfectionists who want to do that. As I said, I deal with white balance always in post-processing. It's so much easier for me, and there's nothing I cannot change to my liking in post. So I keep this on auto all the time. That's at least my recommendation. File format we covered, so there is not much to say here. And the only remark, which in my opinion is important to bear in mind, if you are a pure RAW shooter like I am, you don't necessarily need to have DNG and JPEG. And by the way, you can also configure that the DNG always ends up on your Compact Flash Express Type B card in the card slot, and that your JPEG ends up on the SD card. So you can split them out if you want, but if you want to save storage and you don't want to go for DNG and JPEG, then go for DNG only. Never go for JPEG only, because JPEG is a compressed file format and you will not have the full information, the full spectrum of things you can do in post-processing with your file if you go for JPEG only. So I have this typically on DNG and JPEG. I have enough space here with 1 terabyte on my Compact Flash Express Type B card, so I can afford to have both. But if you have shortage in storage, go to DNG only. That's my recommendation here. Then we have here DNG resolution. I mentioned before my video where I figured out that the dynamic range is a tiny little better and the optimum if you go to MDNG. But most of you very likely will want to leverage the large resolution of 60.3 megapixel on the Leica SL3. So we keep it here for the time being. JPEG settings, you have of course now the film styles here, and all of that we have not yet here. The Leica Looks, because I need to install them. So if I go in here, it says pair with the Leica Fotos app. I'm going to do this later because this is part of a standard setup of a Leica SL3, so I will show it here. And then you get the Leica Looks on your camera. On noise reduction JPEG, I typically have this on medium here, but you can also do this in post. The noise reduction AI-based filter in Lightroom is so good these days. Even if you go for, let's say, 12,000 beyond ISO, you will get the noise hexed away in a very nice way without losing details or getting artifacts in the image. And IDR is also only concerning JPEGs. I do not deal that much with that menu because, as I said, I'm a RAW shooter. What I have here under file format both is only for a quick look by pressing the spacebar on my MacBook, and then it just loads quicker and I get my JPEG preview. But I don't work with JPEGs, I work with RAW files, and that's what you should do too. Noise reduction on long exposures, it's so useful that you can switch it off. I have it typically on, so activate it here. But for instance, if I do star trails, long exposures, I typically deactivate it. Let me explain why. And maybe first of all, in order to make this tutorial a bit more interesting, let me just quickly show you an animation of star trails, how this looks like. And here's the final image, and that looks pretty nice in my opinion. So you see these concentric circles around the North Star, or Polaris, that's the second name of it. And the reason why it is meaningful to switch off noise reduction here is, first of all, you can handle noise later in post-processing. But second, if you take, for instance, a 20-second exposure with an intervalometer, several hundred shots, you always have to wait for the dark frame subtraction. So in more concrete terms, it means you take a picture of the night sky, 20 seconds, and then if this is activated here, you have to wait another 20 seconds for the dark frame subtraction in order to get the noise away and any pixel artifacts. And that takes too long for my taste, so then I switch it off. And you saw this little animation and the final image. I think it looks pretty nice. Was all done with the Leica SL3 in Morocco and using the intervalometer function under drive mode. And so it's very useful that you can switch it on and off here. It's not a feature that was on all Leica cameras in the past, but is here on the Leica SL3. Perspective control we covered, we have quick access to that. Sensor format, I recommend to keep this at 35mm at all times. Stabilization, I recommend to keep it on. There is one situation if you're on a tripod where it makes sense to switch it off, because the camera is then desperately trying to stabilize something which doesn't need stabilization because it's already fixed, mounted on a tripod. So then you can switch it off, but otherwise keep it on, and you gain about 5+ full stops with the in-body image stabilization of the Leica SL3 is really good. Panning mode is something you don't need here for the stabilization, but you can actually switch here to different modes if you want to do a panning with your camera and pan the camera and following a certain subject like a fast moving car. And there might be some situations where you want to change that setting from normal to something else. Aspect ratio, I recommend to keep this at 3:2 because that's the aspect ratio of the full frame sensor. If you need a different format, cut it out later in post-processing, but don't waste any sensor space by going to 16:9, for instance here, which is a typical aspect ratio people use for YouTube. Keep it at 3:2 and crop it out later if you want. But here, go for the natural way of the sensor format. Flash settings we don't cover here. I will very likely do a video on flash photography with the Leica Q3 as a side remark, because there are some excellent features which you can use. So stay tuned on my channel, don't miss that video. It will be an interesting one. I've actually taken some very nice pictures freezing bees and making macro photography by using the excellent flash capabilities of the Leica Q3. Customized control, we already had a lot here, which we looked into, and I don't think there is much more to say for an initial setup of the camera. Capture assistance, that's an interesting one. And you see we have here different info profiles, and for each and every info profile you get settings. And first of all, image overlay is an advanced feature where you can upload an image from your memory card and then combine it with another image you shoot. But I don't want to do that here, so let's go back. And I don't think is a feature I use that often and will use that often in the future, but is a way of expressing some creativity. But here, info profile 1. Let's go into the settings now, and then we can toggle on what we want to have in the info bars. And the info bars are basically these two here. There is 1 and there is 2, and there is essential information here on these info bars which you have. Let's go back here. Capture assistance, settings. And you can change this now to your liking. You can say, do you want to have them switched on as you just saw in live view at the top and the bottom, or do you want to switch them off, right? That would be here, for instance. Or do you want to have a dark background? So let's play with this for a moment so you get some feeling how this looks like. This is how the setup is normally when the camera comes out of box. Let's go back here. Let's go back here into the settings, and let's say now we switch this off. So now it's off, and you see now you have the full frame in front of you, but not the information you might need for your shooting. I never use this, but it might be meaningful to have it, for instance, in play mode, where you can also configure this. Let's go back into the menu. Let's go here to settings. Let's switch them on again. You can also have a dark background. Let's see how this looks like. And now this is no longer transparent. Well, it is transparent to some extent, but it's darker, right? And the icons here are more elevated in that way compared to what we had before. Actually, I might like it that way, but I think the higher transparency is something I appreciate. It's the best compromise to have here on that setting. So let's go here to on, and then you see this is now here without this semi-transparent black bars underlying the icons here on the live screen. What else do we have here? Let's go back here to Capture Assistance, Info Profile 1, Settings. We have grids, we can switch them on or off. So we can also choose between 3x3 and 6x4. Let's go to 3x3, that's the more common one. Let's go here, and then you have your grids, right? It's also something I don't use, but for image composition might be useful if you want to have the third rule, for instance, for your image composition. That can help. You can place Jennifer's face then here in one of these 1/3 or 2/3 spots on the grid, and that might give you a better image composition. In any case, my impression is in the last years, some of these rules which have been applied over years by photographers, a portrait should never have the face in the center of the frame, they are no longer valid. I see a lot of professional photographers taking portraits and the face of the model is in the center of the frame. Doesn't necessarily have to be on 1/3 or 2/3 or maybe in the golden ratio. No need to do that. Just express your creativity. You are the photographer. You are composing the image. Do it in the way you like it most, and don't get enslaved by rules which you read in a textbook on photography. So I don't need the grids. I will get them away again. Let me go here and let me switch them off. Then we have clipping, of course. That's for highlighting over bright areas in the image. Focus peaking is something I switch on all the time. And we can also have here some settings. I want to have this on blue, and I want to have the sensitivity on medium. Why on medium? That's an interesting question. Low is not sensitive enough in my experience, and I shoot Leica cameras for a long time. High is something where maybe focus is found in areas on edges where I don't want the focus to sit. So I typically go here for medium, and that's my recommendation for focus peaking. Then we have here level gauge. That might be interesting if you want to level meter your camera. Let me show you how this looks like. Now you see here, if I, get the camera a little bit moved here, how this changes. You want to have this on green. You see in the tilt, the camera is not fully level metered in the way I've set it up here, but it's also something I only use from time to time. So in my screen here, sorry, now I lost it. Here's Capture Assistant. Let's go back here. In the way I have it here, I don't want it. And then there is histogram, of course, that gives you a little histogram here on the brightness. And that is something a lot of people use. I don't want to have it here because the preview on exposure is good enough for me. So I also get rid of this on the first screen. Well, when I say first screen, stay tuned because there is more to say on the info profile. So let's go here. Let's switch it off. Histogram switching off. All right. Now, what I might want to have is, as I showed before, one option to actually have here no information at all and only my frame. And you can do this by, of course, customizing a button. Now, I have already used all my buttons and I want to have it in this way all the time. But if you want to have a clean screen, I should say, sorry, where you have not this disturbing information, which I personally find useful, but you might find disturbing, then you can also set this up in a different info profile and you can customize a button to toggle between these info profiles. So let me show you how this works. So let's go here back into Capture Assistance. We have the first info profile and we have now set it up with the info bars, no grids, no clipping. We want to have focus peaking. I want to have that. No level gauge and no histogram. And that's my first info profile. Now I can set up a second info profile. Let's go here into that. And let's say here we don't want to have any top and bottom information bars. And then this gives me a clear screen. We also don't want to have grids, no clipping, no focus peaking, no nothing. This is all switched off. And if I would not have here already set up toggling back my autofocus field to the center of the frame, I can customize this now for info profiles. And the problem is before, I think I deactivated this. So let me press and hold. And you see here, let's see if we find info profile somewhere. No, this is no longer here. So we need to activate this again. Let's go into customize controls, FN buttons, and here toggle info levels. This needs to be activated in order to do what I'm going to show you. I will not use that setup. And of course, the video is about my recommendations how to set up the camera, but I want to give you an option space. So I don't use what I'm going to show now, but if you want to use it, that's the way to do it. Make sure you toggle info levels on, then press and hold the FN button here if you want to have it on that customizable function button. Go to toggle info levels, and now you're in your standard live screen. You see the bars are here. You also see on Jennifer, let's magnify her, that focus peaking is kicking in. You see the blue color here coming in. This is all what I configured for info profile number 1. And if I want to have now a clean screen without all these info bars, I toggle between info profile 1 and info profile 2 by pressing that button which I just set up for this functionality. Let's see. Boom. Now you see this is an empty screen. All I see is the scene in front of the camera, no disturbing information. If I want to go back to that, I can actually turn it on again, but then I see a histogram here which I have not configured, because now it switched not back to info profile number 1 but to info profile number 3. And info profile number 3, if you go into that, has the histogram in it. And if we look into the settings of info profile number 3, remember I configured info profile 1 with the bars and the focus peaking, but no histogram. I configured info profile 2 to be clean, no information at all. And info profile number 3 in the settings has now switched the histogram on. That's why we just saw it in live view. And it of course jumps through the different info profiles. And there's also an info profile number 4 which you can configure, and that's end of story, but that's plenty of space. So you have 4 different profiles you can individually configure and toggle through via that function button I just set up for demonstration purposes, but will not set up for my configuration of the camera. If you don't want more than 2 info profiles, so let's say I only want to have info profile 1, which I set up with the info bars and the focus peaking, and then info profile 2, which I set up for a clean screen without any information at all, I can deactivate info profiles here. So info profile 3 is now deactivated, info profile 4 is deactivated. If I now go back into live view, it only toggles between these 2 screens. So this is the screen with the information and the focus peaking, which I showed before. I press that customized button, then it's clean, I press it again, and then it goes back into info profile 1 because it's no longer jumping into info profile 3 with the histogram. Of course, I could individually configure now info profile 3 and 4 also to my liking, but it's not something I want. And as I said, I don't use this functionality at all with the info profiles. So I go back here, I wanted to show it for the sake of completeness. I go back here into customize controls, FN buttons, and I deactivate toggle info levels as I had it before, and I also configure my button back to toggle focus point, and then if I have my focus field somewhere here and I press it, it jumps back to the center of the frame. That's my configuration, but now you have the option, right? You can also configure this to jump between the different info profiles in the way I demonstrated this in the video here. Let's go back to the menu where we stopped before. So let's go here to capture assistance. We covered that with info profiles. I don't use that very often, but if you want to use it, you know now how to use it. Then we have storage management. You can format your compact flash express type B card and your SD card. Of course, I recommend doing this at the beginning when you initially set up the camera, because then the camera can impose its file structure onto these cards, but make sure there is no content on these cards which you need later on. Let's go back here. Storage options. That's an interesting one. And you see, as I said before, when we talked about file format, you can say, for instance, DNG on compact flash express type B and JPEGs on SD card. So you can split them out. I mentioned this before. You can also have DNG and JPEG first on compact flash express card, and then if the compact flash express card would be full, it switches to the SD card. And you can also have DNG and JPEG on both cards simultaneously. I do not recommend this in my particular situation here, because my compact flash express type B card is the fastest currently available in the market, whereas the SD card will always slow down data transfer. That's why I have it here on DNG and JPEG first on compact flash express type B card, which means I don't have a copy backup here on my SD card, which is something I recommended in many videos before, but based on speed and my experience is you don't lose files that easily. I'm doing it this way this time and do not have a backup in the way I typically have it here. If it would count, if I would be a wedding photographer and there is this one event where no one else is taking photos and I'm the only one responsible for good footage, I recommend that you go on this one here. So all your files, the DNG and the JPEGs, and if you have RAW file activated only, it's only the DNG files, they will end up on both, on the Compact Flash Express Type B and the SD card. That means if one of the two cards breaks down, you still have a copy on the other card, which is the safest way of shooting if it really counts. But for me, for the time being, it will be this one. And since I have 1 terabyte of storage on that Compact Flash card, I think this is what I want to go for in this particular situation. Edit file name, you know, the L is fine here. There's not much you can do. You could go for a P or for a K, what have you, but this is Leica, so let's go for an L. It's only 1 letter you can customize, and that's the way I keep it. Shutter type, I have a few remarks to say on that. I typically have it on hybrid. That means, you know, up to a certain shutter speed, it will be the mechanical shutter typically, and then the electronic shutter will kick in if you become super fast in your shutter speed. But I hear from different people the experience that also on slower shutter speed, all of a sudden the camera chooses electronic shutter, and that's not good, because that means that you might get a situation where rolling shutter is ruining your image. So I recommend here, as long as you're operating in the normal range, go to mechanical shutter, and only if you need to go super fast, like let's say 1/16,000 seconds, then switch to the electronic shutter or to hybrid, but otherwise keep it on mechanical. For most shooting situations, you will be fine with mechanical shutter, and the readout time of the full frame sensor in the SL3 and the Q3 is not as fast as the one in a Nikon C8 or Nikon C9. So if, for instance, a car is passing by very quickly, it will be distorted by rolling shutter effects. So my recommendation here is to go for mechanical shutter for the time being, and only if you need the speed, the high speed on the shutter speed, go to hybrid or electronic. Okay, auto review, that is something I like. Let's go into the settings, and I want to have this on permanent. That means the moment in time I half press the shutter release button, it will get the live view away. Let's try this out. Let's take a shot from Jennifer. I'm now in play mode, and I can zoom in here by double tapping. You see, nice and crisp. Jennifer is such a beautiful model. Drop me a comment if you like Jennifer. It's always on my channel. I think she is patient. She looks in a terrific way. She has her hands up in a very artistic way. If you like Jennifer, drop me a comment. If you want to see a different model, drop me a comment too, but I'm not sure I can promise to replace Jennifer because I'm used to work with her for so many years. So I'm in preview mode now here. Let's do this again. Let's tap in. You see, and the moment in time I now half press the shutter button, it goes back into live view. And that's what happens if you go here on permanent in that setting. Let's go back here, permanent. And that's what I want to have. Then we have group display mode. This is activated, and it means if I do an intervalometer, it will help me later to recognize in post-processing that this particular image belongs to a particular group of images in a certain series. And that's why I like group display mode. So switch this on and it will help you later on. Live view setting, keep it at PASM. That means in all situations you have exposure preview. Actually, if you go for P, A and S only, in the most essential one, namely the fully manual shooting, you will not get the exposure preview, and that's actually bad. The next setting, enhanced live view, here is an advanced setting for low light shooters. And what it means is that the camera sensors will detect if the ambient light is very low. And then if you switch this on, it will brighten up the screen by a boost of ISO in live view, in order to help you to get the scene under control. Let me quickly illustrate what enhanced live view is. So I've now switched the lights off. We have very low ambient light here, and you see Jennifer is very dark, and in particular the background is very dark. Let me move the focus field out of the way, and let's now switch enhanced live view on. Let's go into the settings here for live view and let's switch it on. You will see how the scene brightens up in a second. Look at that. This is the difference. You see how this is boosted up in terms of brightness. It concerns only the live view. Let's switch it back and let's switch enhanced live view off, and then you see the difference. But you see the scene is now brighter than it used to be before. Let's switch it off again. Let's go back here, and then you see it's much darker now. Let's do it one more time. So you see the effect. See, it's a big difference. And that is very valuable for low light shooters. For me, typically, I don't use it that often, so I also don't need a customizable function button for that, but it's a feature you can use. You can safely keep it switched on and activated at all times because the camera recognizes whether you have ambient low light, and it only kicks in this enhanced live view with an ISO boost in the live view and making the scene brighter if you really are shooting in low light. So it's safe to keep it on. I nevertheless have it off most of the time. The next setting concerns the Leica Fotos app. I will show this in a moment how to connect it and also get the Leica Looks downloaded into the camera. USB charging I recommend to have on at all times. You, by the way, see here that I'm currently charging while shooting. This is very convenient that you can have this on a charger at all times, and I hardly take out the batteries. I mean, I have the double charger for batteries where you can charge 2 batteries simultaneously, but most often if I just need the camera and want to grab it and go outside, I make sure before it was for an hour or so on a USB charger, and that's why I have this setting activated at all times. USB mode is very convenient to have it on Apple MFI if you have an iPhone like I have, because then it's playing nicely with the iPhone in the Leica Fotos app. But you also have different things here like mass storage if you want to connect it to your Windows PC or MacBook and so on. I have this most of the time on Apple MFI. If you're not sure what you will use the connection on, go select on connection and the camera will give you a prompt and ask you. Wi-Fi is something you also need to use if you want to go for remote shooting. Then we have user profiles. I come to that in a second. Camera settings, display settings, you know, I talked about that already. I have it on auto to switch if my eye goes close to the EVF kicks in. If I remove it, the LCD kicks in, so I don't need a button for that. That's why I have here my magnification and no longer toggling between EVF and LCD. Eye sensor sensitivity I typically have on high. LCD brightness I don't touch, but if you have a very sunny day, you can of course make it brighter if you want. And the same applies also to the EVF. And so on and so on. You can do color adjustments. I hardly use that. EVF frame rate is on my case always at 60 frames per second, but you can go to very fast if you want to avoid any traces by fast moving subjects. I think 60 frames per second for me always does the trick. And then rotate info bars. That's an important one to keep on because it means if you rotate the camera by 90 degrees, these bars here will also rotate by 90 degrees, so you will have them in the right orientation. And that is something I have switched on at all times. So here I think we covered everything, right? Yes, let's go back. Power saving. This is always annoying for me. I don't want to have auto power off, but if you want to have it, make sure it's not immediately after a few seconds, because that's annoying. And it's also not necessary because on the Leica SL3 we have this fantastic standby function here. Just press this button and the camera will go into standby. You save power. The power consumption is minimal at this setting. If you then go to the shutter release button and half press it, the camera will wake up instantly and you will be back in your shooting mode. And that's why I don't need here these power savings. Camera settings, yes, power saving, here we are. So I actually switch this off. Displays, autofocus, auto on off settings. I think this is good for 5 minutes. And power LED, I really want to have that functionality here where it is fading in and out green if it is charging, where it's permanently green if it is fully charged, and where you also see that you're in standby mode and all of that. I really want to have that. And you see here you can have this on auto, low or high. And let's try what high is here. So you see this is then brighter. If you go here to low, it's not so bright, and you can also switch it on auto. Anyway, then we have lens profiles. Currently we have the Aposummicron 50mm. It's very important to bear in mind that if you want to use in-body image stabilization with an adapter and a Leica M lens, you will see that based on the optical coding on the M lens, the Leica SL3 will recognize that lens in most of the cases. If not, you can also manually adjust it, but currently it's grayed out because the autofocus Aposummicron is recognized by the camera. Distance unit for me in Europe is meter. Acoustic signal I have on low. I want to have electronic shutter sound. I want to have autofocus confirmation, but I do not want to have notification signals. That's my setting here. Then we have date and time. We set this up already. Reset image numbering. I told you not to do it because if you never reset it, your image numbering will be your shutter count. Automatic sensor cleaning you can use if you think your sensor is dirty. Pixel mapping is also for some corrections, and resetting the camera we did at the very beginning. So this is done. Then we have camera information. We have here firmware. I'm not even sure if this is the newest one. I need to check. I do this every few weeks. Lens firmware version is 4.0. I think that's the right one. We have then here also the copyright information. And this one I use. So I always switch this on. And if you go into here, you can now basically delete info and can say math photographer. And that is written into the metadata of your file. And in this way, you have always some proof that this is your image. And I really want to have that. I have it on all of my cameras activated, and you see it's very quick. I have it in here now. Let's go to artist. Let's delete the word artist. Let's go to math photographer. And then we have set this up. And we are getting close to the camera in the way it was set up before I brutally reset it in order to make this tutorial. I'm very happy if I have all my functions and customizations back, to be honest. You see, typing in front of the camera is not so easy. Here we go. And now this is set up in the way I want to see it in the metadata. Language English we covered, that's all. We're back at the beginning of the menu. Now there are 3 more topics I want to quickly cover. I want to very briefly talk about autofocus. I want to show how to set up the Leica Fotos app and to get the Leica Looks on the camera. And I also want to quickly talk about user profiles. Let's now talk about user profiles, and that's a bit tricky. So I've already created one user profile where I stored my settings. So for instance, we customize this control screen here. We have all the settings in the camera and the way I set them up. And I stored this under a profile called math, but I will show you from scratch now how this works. So this is my profile. You see this is activated, is here checkboxed. The moment in time when I initially set up the camera and go to manage profiles and save it under a profile, and you see there is a bunch of unused profiles here. My one I saved under math because that's me. The moment in time I save this, the default profile is the one which is the initial setup as the camera came out of box. Let's try this out. So currently math is checkboxed here. If I go into the control screen, that's a lakmus paper test. You see this is configured in the way I set it up. Exposure mode, drive mode, file format, Leica Fotos app, then focus mode, autofocus mode, metering, and self-timer. If I now switch back to the default profile, you will see how this changes. And it is a bit tricky, as I said, but I try to explain it as best as possible. If I go back to default profile, let's go back here. You see this is checkboxed now. Look at what happens to the control screen. It is no longer what I set up. The drive mode is again back down here in the second field on the second row. The metering is again here in the first field in the second row. We have the file format again in the upper right hand side corner, and that was the way we saw it when we took the camera out of box. Now all my effort was not for nothing, because if I switch back into, let's go here to user profiles once again, here we go, and I switch back to math, I gain everything back I set up in the course of this video. So now we are in the configuration I've set up for myself, and all the other things are also set up in the way I wanted to have it. For instance, if I get away with the autofocus field here, I press the FN button, it centers back in the middle of the frame. What I strongly recommend, if you ever have spent so much time setting up the camera for your individual workflow as I did in this video, make sure you save it as a user profile as I did. This is math. And in order to make sure that it is not wiped out if you reset the camera, make also sure to export it, right? So here we have export profiles, and then you say yes. And then it gets stored on your storage card, and you will not lose it. Even if I reset the camera, I can bring back my profiles and in this way recover everything I, for instance, set up here on my control screen, or all the customization of buttons. See, it remembers where I place the autofocus field. Let's say I place it here. Then I toggle it back to the center, and if I press it again, it goes back where I placed it last. Very useful function if you have repeated shooting of a scene. Let's place it here, back at the center of the frame, back at the location where the focus field was last. Very convenient. This is very well done by Leica. So make sure you store all your settings, the configuration of the camera, the customization of the control wheels, the buttons, everything under a profile, a user profile, so you don't lose your work if something goes wrong with the camera and you have to reset it, and make sure you export it in the way I just did. Export profiles, yes, this is very, very important. Otherwise, you start from scratch all over again. And even here in this tutorial, I don't know how many time we spent so far. I didn't track the time, but it's significant time you spent in order to get your workflow customized in a camera like the SL3. Let me add one more step here. Let's set up a different profile. Let's go now. We are under math currently. Let's say my wife wants to use the camera and my wife says, my husband is a stupid guy. He has exposure mode already here. You see, here we go to shutter speed priority, aperture priority, and he also has set up here a soft field in the upper left-hand side corner to switch between the exposure mode. So why has he not placed something else there? Because before he explained that the shutter is best placed on mechanical, but sometimes you might use the hybrid shutter or the electronic shutter setting. And why not having this here? So let's do this. Let's tap and hold. And then you see here shutter type. Let's get this in. And what I can do now is I can go back into user profiles and save this as a different configuration. Let's say manage profiles, save as profile. I save it under profile 2. Yes. We go back and rename it and we call this now shutter. Let's delete this one here. Let's say capital letter S shutter. And we store it. All right, now we have another profile here. So we have the default profile, camera as out of box. We have math as a profile and we have shutter. Let's go back to math. And now you see my exposure mode is back. I have my exposure mode here, although my wife declared me to be stupid. If I do now switch to user profile shutter, then the exposure mode is no longer the first soft field. It is actually the selection of the shutter type here. You see mechanical, electronic, hybrid, and so on. Let's go back to user profiles. So here we are. And now we go back to math. And then I have my setting here again with the exposure mode. Now make sure you export again, because if you export your user profiles, it's exporting all of them. So now I need to export this again. And then also the profile, which is called shutter, is successfully exported and is at my disposal. If I now reset the camera, as I did before, factory reset, and choose under deleting user profiles, no, I can still reset the camera, but recover from the storage card my user profiles and have all the settings immediately back in the way I set them up, which saves a lot of time. So make sure you get familiar with user profiles in order not to waste time. Let's go back there. So you have, by the way, here, if you go to manage profiles and say you have here also a third profile, a fourth and a fifth and a sixth. So you have a lot of profiles where you can play with. You can rename them, you can delete them. If I want to delete the shutter profile, I can do so. I get a warning. I'm not doing it now because I have this here for illustrative purposes set up, and so on and so on. So there's a lot you can do with this manage profiles. If the camera has ever been reset and you have still user profiles on your storage card, go to import profiles and import them. That is also an option you have here, of course. And I think on user profiles, that's all I wanted to say. And let's now turn our attention to the Leica Fotos app. If you start for the very first time with the Leica Fotos app, make sure you take the USB cable which was shipped in the box. It's this one here, you see? And now you need to connect this to the camera. So let's get my charger cable off here. This is off. Let's get the cable inserted into the camera. It's here on the lower left-hand side. Let's get this in and open the Leica Fotos app on your iPhone and connect the iPhone to the Leica SL3. Alright, so I have not connected yet the iPhone with my Leica SL3, but I'm screen recording. And the first screen you get here is whether you want to log in to your Leica account. You don't need to do that, but if you have a Leica account, then you can log in. I go for skip for the time being. And then the app asks if it is allowed to access my photo library. That's important, allow full access. And now I connect it with the camera by plugging the USB-C cable, which is already in the camera, to my phone. And I don't need notifications, don't allow. And now I can add a camera. Let's go to add camera and we swipe. We go to Leica SL, sorry, I was too quick, continue. And we want the SL3. And we go connect via cable, connect USB-C cable. And then it should find the camera fairly quickly. Camera found, Leica SL3, connect. Leica Fotos would like to use Bluetooth, allow, because then you can also do this wireless. Let's wait for the connection setup. Would like to final and connect to devices on your local network, you can allow that. Date and time synced, yes, do so. Turn on geotagging. If you want to have geotagging in your images in the metadata, you can use your iPhone for that. I don't use geotagging at this point in time, so I will skip that. Wireless connectivity, yes, done. And now it's connecting. Connecting to camera, preparing your gallery, a lot of things going on. And by the way, the Leica Fotos app in terms of data transfer with the Leica SL3 and the new version of the Leica Fotos app is a game changer. It's much, much quicker and much better than it used to be before. So now in the upper left hand side corner, you have the button for the Leica Looks. Let's press this. And now you can go, for instance, for Chrome. You can say transfer to Leica SL3, transferring, transfer complete. Let's go back. Let's also go for Eternal. I like this one in particular. Transfer to Leica SL3. You see, this is very, very quick. This is much, much better. Contemporary, I also want to have on the camera. Let's go back here. Classic, why not? Simple like that. Works really, really nice. I don't like blue, but I want to have sepia. And I also want to have selenium. Let's see. Transferring. Okay, before I said I don't like blue, but now I want to have blue. Let's tap on it. Transfer. And now we have all the Leica Looks on the camera here. And I will show you in a moment how to access them on the camera. So that's the way the Leica Fotos app works. Of course, you can shoot remotely. So let's go to remote. And now let's take a shot of Jennifer here. You see, this works very well. So you have remote control over the camera via your iPhone and so on and so on. So this is not supposed to be a tutorial on the Leica Fotos app, of course, but I wanted at least to show you the basic functionality. And we also have the Leica Looks now on the Leica SL3, which is very nice, of course. Since we have now transferred the Leica Looks to the camera, they are also at our disposal there. Let's see where this is. Let's go into the menu here and let's go into JPEG settings. And then in JPEG settings, we have the Leica Looks. And you see here's now blue, eternal, contemporary, classic, sepia, and selenium. They are all here. And I can switch. So if I take an image of Jennifer in the way it is, let's quickly switch here to autofocus continuous. Because this is people photography, although Jennifer is not a real human being. But sometimes she appears to me almost like a human being. Let's go to eye, face, body detection. Here we go. Let's take a picture. And if you look at that, in play mode, looks really good. We can also tap in here and you see the focus peaking here, the blue color kicking in. Let's now change this in the JPEG settings to some different look. And let's go to, for instance, contemporary. And you see how the live view changed, right? Let's take an image. Let's go back here. Let's take another one with a different look. Let's go to eternal. Look how the colors are elevated here. Very nice. Okay, let's go back into play mode. And then we have here the different looks. See, this was without the Leica Looks. This is with the Leica Looks here. This is eternal, looks really good. And it's actually a lot of fun to play with these Leica settings because Leica engineers in the headquarters in Wetzlar spend a lot of time to calibrate these looks in a way that they really look Leica-like. And I like that. That's why I have set it up here on one function button at the front of the camera. If you watch me pushing that button, you see now here we have here the different film styles. And then here we see the Leica Looks kicking in all the different ways. And you see also in the preview how this is changing. So you see actually, let's go to selenium. Beautiful. Very nice. And I think that concludes at least my little survey on the Leica Looks. The third topic I wanted to mention quickly is autofocus, but as said at the beginning of the video, I will post a dedicated tutorial to that because it's a complex topic. But if we go back into the profile I have here and go to autofocus single, typically the best way to work with this is if you are here on field, because then you have your field to move around here. I can focus on the TV in the background, I can focus on Jennifer in the foreground, and that all works pretty well. Now, if you want to have subject tracking, like people, animals, whatever, then you should switch to continuous autofocus. So this is here, and I have my camera very often on autofocus continuous, even if I go for not moving subjects. And it works very well. The camera is just using more power consumption because it's updating focus all the time. And then if you go for tracking, or let's go maybe as an example for eye, face, body detection, you see immediately it recognizes Jennifer's face. You see these green corners here, and also the eyes are recognized and all of that. And of course, if I would now have Jennifer moving up and down, which is very difficult for her because she's a static model, and I will try to come up with something creative for my autofocus tutorial here in the studio, then of course Jennifer's face would be tracked. And on autofocus you have a lot of options here. If we go into that, go back here, we have animal detection, that's a beta version. We have eye, face, body detection. We have tracking in general. I could basically have every subject that's moving in the scene and it would be tracked. And it's always very important, if you want to have tracking, that you go into autofocus continuous. And now I should actually stop the tutorial, but I have skipped one tiny little discussion which could become a very big discussion, and that's videography. And before we quickly cover that in not more than a couple of minutes, let's go back here and turn on autofocus single. And let's go here on field autofocus so that we are back to where we've been before. So here we go. And now in the video mode you get by swiping, and that's really the last few remarks I want to do. And everything here works kind of the same way as it does in the still images menu. You have a dedicated menu here. If I go into that, you can customize now here your 8 fields. You cannot customize the aperture, the shutter speed, ISO and exposure value. You always have the microphone level here. And the customization here works exactly the same as if you go for still images in the photo mode. And then we have also here a dedicated menu. A lot of these settings are very similar. You have, of course, the video profiles, and I typically recommend to set them up in a way that you go for MOV, because that's the Apple format, which I think works very well with QuickTime and all the software you have on your MacBook. And sometimes I go for 8K, sometimes I'm good with 4K. 8K is in particular useful if you want to crop into a scene in Premiere Pro and then export the video as a 4K video. You get plenty of reserves if you go for 8K or cinematic 8K. So you can set this up here in the way you want. Video capabilities of this SL3 are absolutely excellent, and the camera is also dealing very well with heat, so you can basically film for a prolonged time without the camera overheating. And you have a lot of other settings here. Of course, you can shoot with log profiles. And I have a dedicated video on videography with the Leica Q3 on my channel. And most of what I said there is fully applicable here to the Leica SL3. So I will post this video down below in the info box. But all the customization with buttons, control wheels, with the control screen here in general, and moving around these soft fields for quick and easy access, this is exactly the same. That's why I think it doesn't make sense to repeat myself a lot. So we swipe back into photo mode and conclude the video here. I hope you liked it. I hope this was useful for you. I tried to cover the most important settings. I also gave you my individual recommendations, how I have set up my user profile, which is called Math now after this video, from scratch, after factory resetting the camera, in order to give you my configuration which works best for my photographic workflow. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel, there is always more to come. Thanks for watching, stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.